Hello everybody, my name's Andy Hill. I'll be teaching the first ever music supervision workshop this summer in Varna as part of the summer film scoring program. Music supervision is a field that's come into its own now. Music supervisors in Hollywood now have their own guild, they have their own award show, and whereas as little as 10 years ago, they had to fight for credit on television shows and feature films. They're now readily given credit. They may even at some point become eligible for major awards like the Golden Globes and even the Oscars. They're certainly working towards that. But more importantly, the reasons behind that sort of escalation in status have a lot to do with the fact that the music business as we once knew it up until 1999 or so has changed dramatically. Publishers used to be the real power brokers in the music business because they controlled the rights to a catalog of songs. They could offer those songs to artists. If artists were willing to take them and put them on their albums, there was a chance that that would become a valuable copyright and would yield mechanical royalties and other residuals for everybody concerned. But with the demise of brick and mortar record stores, hard product, vinyl LPs, CDs, cassettes, and the advent of streaming, downloading, etc., all the business models have changed. And nowadays, the most effective way for a young artist to obtain exposure for their material, for their band, for their solo career, what have you, is with placement, or what's known in the business as sync, synchronization with a film or television or game, what have you, media for the screen, that whole spectrum of entertainments. And it was only a few years ago at a Billboard magazine conference in Hollywood that the head of licensing for the BMG Music Group, which controls an enormous catalog of rights, said that for the first time ever in the history of their company, there was more revenue generated by synchronization with film and television than by all the other sources of revenue combined. And that includes everything that we think of as record sales. And that's CDs, downloads, streaming, subscription fees, and so forth. So it's become enormously important. This is why you see websites like Bandcamp and so forth have sprouted up, basically to advertise material to music supervisors. Music supervisors now play the role that was once played by A&R people and music executives at record labels. Talent scouts. Back in the 80s and the 90s, they would literally send these people out to clubs in cities like New York, Los Angeles, London, Paris, to listen to new acts and to determine whether or not they wanted to pick that artist up, offer them a recording contract, publishers to offer them a songwriting deal, things like that. Nowadays, we tend to do our shopping online, as we do for everything else. And if you're a filmmaker or a showrunner for a television show or a producer of any kind of visual media, and you need music, particularly if you need it on a budget, and you want something that sounds like U2, or something that sounds like Rihanna, but isn't as expensive as Rihanna, you come to a music supervisor. And the music supervisor becomes like a mini music department for your production company. You're essentially hiring them to do all the things that in-house music departments used to do. Find the material, place the material in the film, Make sure it's appropriate to the story, to the setting, to the period, to the milieu. All of this. Get the material approved by all the people concerned. Then go out and do a copyright search. Determine who owns the material. And God knows with hip-hop, that could be a whole slew of people because there are often multiple writers attached to any one copyright. Each of those writers may actually have a different publishing interest. Some of those publishing companies may be major companies like Warner Chappell or Famous Music, etc. Some of them may simply be, letterhead companies that the songwriter has created for the purpose of collecting his or her performance income or mechanical income on the copyright. So you're the music supervisor. That's the very first thing you have to do is to clear the copyright. Determine who owns the song, clear the rights, make sure everybody's okay with the idea that it's going to be used in this film or television show. Then you've got to engage in this whole negotiating process. What's it going to cost you to put that song in your show? There's a show, it's getting very popular on Netflix these days called The End of the Effing World, which is supervised by a guy out of London named Matt Biffa. Wonderful show, terrific music supervision. Most of the artists not particularly well known because they didn't have a ton of money to spend. So the music supervisor has to go out and do what those A&R executives used to do, scouting for talent. Now maybe they're scouting on YouTube or Bandcamp instead of in the live clubs, but they're still scouting and looking for people who need exposure, who can benefit from exposure in that film, and who are affordable. And in that sense, the music supervisor is now almost functioning like a producer. Then, if the film or television show generates enough excitement, enough buzz, that somebody thinks that its soundtrack might be marketable, might be a popular item for people to stream on Spotify, Pandora, what have you. They set up the terms of what used to be called a soundtrack deal. In the old days, it was hard product, like a CD. And you negotiated with the record company. They would pick up the rights to the soundtrack. The participants on the soundtrack would be entitled to receive certain royalties for this. Nowadays, it's a different process, but in other ways, the same thing. So that's a lot. On top of the fact that the music supervisor, beyond just finding the songs and the artists that get synchronized with the film or television show, oftentimes is also asked to find a composer. Because whether we're talking about Game of Thrones or a film like Lady Bird, most films, 90% of them, need a dramatic underscore. It's not just about the songs, as cool as they may be, it's also about the background music that supports the story, the psychological and emotional values of the story, and so forth. And this is the sort of work that we associate with big names like Hans Zimmer, Danny Elfman, James Newton Howard, Dario Marianelli, the Oscar winners. Not everybody can afford an Oscar winner. Believe me, not everybody can afford Hans Zimmer. But if the producer comes to the music supervisor and says, gee, I really wish we had Hans Zimmer, but we can't even come close to affording him, the music supervisor's job will then be to scout the same way they did for songwriters and performers, to look for young composers coming up in the business, maybe just out of school. Maybe they've been working principally in commercials. Maybe they've just done one small indie feature that did well at the Sundance Festival or something like that. Music supervisor has to be aware of this person to recommend a number of different options to the filmmakers and say, well, I think we can get this person, I think we can get this lady. She's available for the next 2 months. After that, she has another project. But if we move fast and we negotiate with her, we can get her on our project. And the music supervisor then oversees that deal and the shepherding in of this composer. Again, that's something that in the old days was done by highly paid executives, salaried executives who worked for the production companies. Those people still exist at the big studios, the big 5 or 4 or whatever there are left now. But with the smaller production companies that increasingly are producing the things we see on Showtime, HBO, Sci-Fi Channel, Netflix, not to mention Amazon and Google, these are often small production companies, sometimes set up expressly just to produce that one project for Netflix or for Amazon. They're not going to have a music department. They're not going to have music executives. They look to the music supervisor. So music supervision has become the main conduit through which music gets into media. That makes music supervisors in very high demand for songwriters, for recording artists, for bands, for soloists, for composers of all kinds. They are essentially the entry point to getting your music into a film. That gives them a fair amount of status and power in the industry that they didn't have only 10 or 15 years ago, when they're just a handful of music supervisors. That's when I started in the business, and I was one of maybe 20. Now there are hundreds. But there's room for all of them, and there are room for more. And the purpose of this program, and the reason Derek decided to offer it, is that this is now a real trade. As I say, it has its own guild, it receives its own award, and it's a viable thing for people who have a real passion for music in screen media. Whether you have a musical background, a business background, a technical background, if you love music and you know music, and particularly if you have a very wide scope in terms of your knowledge of music, pop music, classical music, roots, folk, ethnic music, and so forth, it's a pretty great profession. The fees, like everything else in this business, depend on the level of project and the quality of work. And like everything else in this business, they start modest, but they can get, they can get quite high when you're in demand. We are going to cover all of the essential facets of music supervision, from song selection and placement to music clearance, rights clearance, copyright search, licensing, negotiation, soundtrack development, and composer choice. Everything that the music supervisor could conceivably do, we'll try to hit on. The 1-week course will necessarily cover these things in a more abbreviated, more compressed fashion. For those of you interested in a 3-course meal, there'll be a 3-week version available that will also give you hands-on experience in the actual selection and placement of music in a film, and also contact with professionals in the industry. So we're looking forward to it. We hope it enrolls fully, and we hope it justifies itself and will run for many, many years. And I'll hope to see you there. Again, I'm Andy Hill. I'm a former Vice President of Music at Disney, Grammy winner, and a long time, I hesitate to say, but a 30-year veteran of the industry and of music supervision. I'll see you in Varna.